Recently, I purchased a 2022 Platinum Pass to King's Dominion, a park relatively close to me and has been high at the top of my must-do list for years, yet somehow I managed to elude it in my 16 years of life. I took my first 2 visits this past October during the Haunt event, and even though the park was absolutely slammed both days, I was still very impressed with nearly every aspect of King's Dominion. It's such an underrated park that I would take over something like Great Adventure. I was able to get on all 10 coasters it was currently possible for me to get on, so today I'll be counting down those rides, giving my opinions, and seeing how they rank. First though, there are 4 rides that I want to mention that will not be appearing in this video. First of all, Avalanche looks like a solid ride, but it was closed for the entire 2021 season as King's Dominion makes way for Tumbili, a new for 2022 SNS 40 free spin that should be a great addition, but ranks somewhere towards the bottom of this list. Also, the Great Pumpkin Coaster has a height limit, so I did not get on that, and Volcano, well, you know about Volcano. Now with those mentions out of the way, let's get into the actual list. At number 10, I have Anaconda, the 1991 Aero Looper. At first glance, you would probably guess that, like a lot of people, I don't like this ride because I do have it in last place. However, I think that Anaconda is a pretty fun ride. It's just that I don't think that King's Dominion has a single bad coaster and something has to bring up the rear. The first 2 inversions in Anaconda are fairly intense, and the last 2 corkscrews provide some pretty fun hang time. I also really like the setting of the ride over the water, and it was fairly smooth from my experience. The big flaw with this ride though is that the middle section, it's just a bunch of random slow turns that don't really do anything. The section isn't totally terrible though because the setting is pretty cool to look at, but this section, it doesn't help the ride either. I don't know, the layout to this ride is pretty stupid, but there's a certain charm to it that I really enjoyed. Moving into the 9th spot, I have Apple's Apple, a Mock Rides Wildemoz clone from 2002. Apple's Apple is pretty much all you could hope for out of a Wild Mouse. You of course have the great laterals, plus it's an extremely smooth ride, probably the second smoothest coaster in the park behind its next door neighbor. I also really enjoyed the environment of the ride, having Racer 75 on one side of you and Twisted Timbers on the other. It's really cool to have coasters going around you as you're just cruising around a Wild Mouse. Plus, with that big drop to start the ride that for some reason gave me that stomach dropping feeling that I have not felt in years, it's fairly thrilling for a Wild Mouse. It's worth a quick ride if the line is short, but in the end, it's still a cloned Wild Mouse. At number 8, I have Woodstock Express, a PTC Junior wooden coaster and another family coaster that surprised me in a positive way. I rode in the back row and I got heavy Goldilocks vibes from this. Let me explain. I think this ride hit it just right to satisfy both parents and kids, sort of like a Pixar movie. It's smooth enough for small kids to enjoy, but rough enough to let you know that you're on a wooden coaster. It's pretty tame, being just 35 feet tall and 35 miles an hour, to where kids are not going to be intimidated, but it throws in some surprisingly strong airtime and laterals that are going to keep the adults on board entertained. I really don't have any gripes with this ride, it's just everything it should be, but that thing is a family wooden coaster. At number 7, I have the Step Up wooden coaster from Woodstock Express, Racer 75. The racing coaster from 1975. Racer 75 doesn't really pack much, if anything, in the way of forces, but it's overall just a very fun and enjoyable roller coaster. Every time you do get a race, it's fun running up alongside the other train, and there's something about a classic out and back wooden coaster layout when it's executed smoothly, which Racer 75 is extremely smooth, that is so satisfying. It's exactly what roller coasters were originally meant to be. You don't need to pack in crazy Immelmans or Stangle dives or zero-G stalls, just go for a fun, fast little journey out and back, simple but very enjoyable. Moving into the 6th spot, I have Backlot Stunt Coaster, a Premier Rides launch coaster from 2006. I know I just talked about how a ride without any forces can still be pretty fun, but don't get me wrong, I still love forces, and Backlot Stunt Coaster gives a great variety of pretty much all of them. You start with that launch that starts out pretty slow, but then you pick up a lot in the second half of the launch, and it provides some decent acceleration Gs. The subsequent upwards double helix then produces a fair amount of positive Gs, enough to where I actually grayed out on that element in my second ride. Then the S-curves leading towards the helicopter scene produce some nice laterals, and finally you complete the forces catalog when you're blasted out of the building and are thrown up with some pretty great flojector airtime. There are just a lot of things about Backlot, from the cars to the theming to the forces to the indoor section, that make Backlot Stunt Coaster a really underrated ride that does appeal to thrill seekers. At number 5, I have Flight of Fear, the 1996 Premierides LAM launch coaster, and the first ever coaster to utilize an LAM launch. If you just compare Flight of Fear to the outdoor spaghetti bowl clones like Joker's Jinx, you're probably going to be disappointed. Joker's Jinx is taller, has a faster launch, is noticeably more intense, progresses through the layout faster due to the lack of a mid-course, and properly takes advantage of the awesome head choppers. It's sort of unfortunate for Flight of Fear that the outdoor clones exist because Flight of Fear is still great in its own right. It's a smooth, pretty intense launch coaster that would be a great addition to almost any park. The inversions are also all very snappy and intense. If I hadn't ridden Joker's Jinx before, I think I would absolutely love Flight of Fear, but as I have ridden Joker's Jinx, Flight of Fear for me stands in there in the B, not A tier, but I still enjoy the ride. Now moving up to a coaster in that A tier, we have Dominator. Many of you might be confused about what I have other than Intimidator and Twisted Timbers above Dominator, but trust me, we'll get there. First though, I want to talk about the relocated B&M floor list that is Dominator. I seriously do not understand how Dominator can be relocated yet be so smooth. It's legitimately one of the smoothest roller coasters that I have ever ridden, which adds a lot to the ride for me because I don't have to spend half the ride making sure I don't bang my head into those hard B&M over the shoulder restraints. Dominator is not an overly intense ride, but there's just something that's hard to put into words about the sequencing of the elements that makes this easily my favorite B&M floor list. It makes the ride nearly crack my top 25 coasters overall. I feel like every single element on this ride flows so well together, and I love how the ride isn't just, well okay, we're gonna throw 7 straight inversions that you've already seen a million times at you in a row and be done. Yeah, it does have 5 inversions, but in between those inversions you usually have something interesting like a low to the ground bang turn, an airtime moment, a turnaround. I think it all adds a lot to the pacing and makes the layout a lot more interesting. Dominator is one of those rides that you think is so amazing, but it's sort of hard to put into words why. Now, just barely edging out Dominator for me is probably the most controversial pick of the video. At number 3, I have Grizzly. I can already imagine Coaster Dash punching the air at this pick. Now first, I will say, is it bumpy? Yeah, a bit, but honestly, there are way rougher rides out there. I could probably name 5 coasters off the top of my head that are rougher than Grizzly that I myself have ridden. But we don't have all day, so let's get into why I love this ride so much. First of all, the setting. It's way back in the woods, secluded from the rest of the park, and I can see why I have heard some people claim that this is a better night ride than the Beast. Second, the restraints. Grizzly does run PTC trains, but the lap bars aren't like your normal PTC bars. They're much thinner in both the width and length of the bar. They literally only cover one leg. Like, I have 2 legs, by the way. I could have easily just gone up out of the train without the restraints unlocking if I wanted to. It's also so easy to get room, and these might be my favorite restraints of all time. Pair that with the ridiculous airtime and laterals that you experience at points on this ride, and you are in for a wild but awesome journey. There's one moment this drop into the tunnel where you're launched with some sustained borderline ejector airtime while getting thrown to the side of the train, and you have a crazy head chopper right ahead of you. Believe the Grizzly hype, it is real. Now on to King's Dominion's legendary top 2, I have Twisted Timbers. I mean, it's Twisted Timbers. What is there to say that already hasn't been said? The whole ride is just ejector, ejector, ejector inversion. Ejector, ejector. It's just an enthusiast dream ride. Well, actually, that'd be Steel Vengeance, but still. This ride is just absolutely relentless. You can hardly get a breath in because you are constantly being ejected with some of the strongest airtime any of us have ever experienced. And then you throw in my new favorite drop style, some awesome floating inversions, an intense turn, and even a few great moments of laterals, and you have what is now my number 4 overall. Now at number 1, I of course have the legendary Intimidator 305. I mean, side 305. I don't even know where I could start with this ride. It's right neck and neck with Skyrush for both the most intense coaster that I've ridden and the best pacing of any of the coasters I've ridden. We all know about the absolutely ridiculous intensity of I-305, but beyond that, you also have an amazing drop, those wicked triple snaps, the last one being especially amazing. I have to grab my vest every time so that I don't get severe whiplash. You also have 3 understated airtime moments thrown in there, and every second of the ride there's something happening. It really never lets up throughout the entire ride, and that's why I think Intimidator 305 is my number 3 overall. It's relentless. So that's about all we have for this video. If you've been to King's Dominion or have ridden any of the clones of the rides I've talked about, I'd love to hear your thoughts on them in the comments down below. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you disagree, that's all fine. All coaster opinions are welcome. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, I would love if you could drop a thumbs up and maybe consider subscribing. Leave any suggestions, thoughts, or video ideas down in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys later. See ya.